Hey guys, this is John. We're going to look at an example today where defense really saved my bacon. This is from a tournament game I played in 2011, and I think defense is a much neglected topic in the chess world. If you think of tactics trainers, chess puzzle books, very often they're geared towards the offensive side, the side trying to win material or checkmate. But to become a strong player, you undoubtedly need to spend a decent amount of time thinking about improving your defensive play. And if you're not at the very least examining defensive resources when you're going through your games, I think you're doing yourself a disservice because you're going to be defending a lot in chess. Even very strong players have to defend many, many positions, especially when they're playing the black pieces. So I played this game in 2011 at the Continental Class Championship in Washington, D.C. I had the black pieces against Jared Defibaugh, USCF rating of 2334 at the time. I was 2494. My opponent opened with e4, and surprise, I played a double king pawn. I did play e4, e5 for a spell as black, I'd say from maybe 2008-ish to 2011. I was defending the black side of the Ruy Lopez oftentimes, and one thing I didn't really get to, though, in my e4, e5 study was an in-depth exploration of various gambits that white can throw at you. And lo and behold, my somewhat lower-rated opponent threw one at me in this game. So he played knight f3. I played knight c6. He played d4. I took on d4, as you very often should in these positions. And then instead of just recapturing and going into a scotch, my opponent played bishop c4. And this initiates the Scotch gambit, or as we see in the game, the Max Lange attack. I played bishop c5. You can also play knight f6. That's perfectly fine as well. But bishop c5 was the move I was a bit more familiar with. White castled. Now I played knight f6. So you can see white's not making a point to regain this pawn. I have it defended now a couple times. White played e5. And I knew to play d5 here, which is an unusual looking move. White's attacking my knight. It seems like at first sight we should move this knight. But in fact, d5 is a very common response to e5. Black has to fight for center control and trying not to get too far behind in development or putting the knight on an awkward square if you were to move it. But this does initiate a pretty forced and sharp sequence. So my opponent took on f6. I grabbed the bishop on c4. White played rook e1 check. I played bishop e6. And now knight g5. And this position already looks very messy. It is all theory. Many of you may play this line for either color. And I still knew some moves here. So I played queen d5. So perhaps getting ready to castle queenside, but also just reinforcing e6. White can take on g7 at any moment, but I will play rook g8. And even though the black king side is somewhat of a disaster zone, black has these nice pawns in the center to compensate. And as I said, I'm ready to get my king to safety on the queen side. But after queen d5, white played a very attractive move, knight c3. This hits my queen, taking advantage of the fact that d takes c3 loses to queen takes d5 and the pin on the bishop on e6. So knight c3, I played queen f5. Again, all theory. And now here, Defibaugh played g4, attacking my queen again. And bear in mind, I still can't take. Queen takes g4 would be a huge mistake. White responds with queen takes g4. This bishop is still pinned. Also, the knight on g5 is defended by the bishop. And here is where I made a big mistake. And I remember after playing this game, I looked in the database just out of curiosity, and I believe I was the highest rated player to ever make this mistake, according to the database. So I had that dubious distinction. The main move is queen g6 with complicated play, although theory says that black is doing just fine. But I played queen takes f6. Natural looking move. But this gives black a lost position. Straight up. There's not really much debate about that. And my opponent responded correctly without really spending much time. He seemed to know what to do. He played knight d5, attacking my queen, also hitting c7. So it's a double attack. I played queen d8. And I was sort of hoping to, survive if white plays something like knight takes e6, f takes e6, rook takes e6, play king f7, and maybe be able to defend based on the fact that white has a couple loose pieces here. But my opponent found a much better continuation. So if you want to pause your video and try to figure this out, feel free to do that now. White to move. Okay, so those of you who spotted rook takes e6, check, well done. This is far stronger than knight takes e6. Because after f takes e6, knight takes e6, white is hitting my queen, and this knight on d5 is immune from capture because of the royal fork, knight takes c7. That would be very bad news. So, yeah, after rook takes e6, f takes e6, knight takes e6, I knew I was in very bad shape. I sensed at this point that I had royally screwed up the opening and was probably losing, because white's down a little bit of material, but they're hitting c7 twice. My queen's under attack. The bishop is also loose in many lines. So I played queen d6 here. Queen d7 is also possible, although just here's one game in the database I found from this position. It's also not pretty at all for black. Knight d takes c7, king f7, knight g5 check, and there was a game, Karpov versus Petrukin from 2007. I think it was a different Karpov. It says A Karpov, rated 2304, but I'm pretty sure that wasn't Anatoly Karpov. But anyways, Petrukin played king to g6, but after queen f5, rook a to e8, knight c to e6, black already resigned because queen f5 is a pretty nasty threat, or possibly even queen e4. Just black is caught out on a limb here with the king. So instead, knight takes e6, I played queen d6. And I saw a move at the time that I thought was just very good for white here. White does not have to be in a hurry to take this pawn on c7. If white does that, that would bring some salvation. King d7, and you can go after the rook on a8, but I'm very happy to take on e6, and actually this knight is trapped. So white doesn't want to sell out too quickly here, but bishop f4 is a very nasty move. And again, I have this dilemma. I can't take either knight because I get forked on c7, and I was probably going to play knight e5, but after queen e2, I think black is just busted because the knight is attacked twice. I still have all of the existing problems. My king is caught in the center. I can't legally castle. As you can see, the knight is preventing that. So this is a crushing position for white. So I therefore somewhat breathed a sigh of relief when my opponent responded with queen f3 here on move number 15 instead of bishop f4. Now, this is the critical position of the game. When my opponent played queen f3, I had a feeling my position was still highly suspect, if not potentially lost. But this gives me a bit of a window of opportunity to try to come up with a defense. So black to move. I am up this slight bit of material, but again, white can cash in at any moment. Also, queen f3 enables stuff like knight takes g7 or even queen f5 in certain lines. Black to move. If you want a challenging calculation task, this may take you a while. Feel free to pause your video, try to figure out how black should play here. Okay, so I spent about half my remaining time on this move during the game. And my notes indicate that that was about 30 minutes out of a remaining 1 hour or so. This is a long time control tournament game. So I spent an exorbitant amount of time working out the complications. And actually, this is one of the few circumstances in my chess career where I think spending a huge amount of time actually paid off. Normally, I'm not a fan of that, but I make an exception for a position like this because I knew one false move and I was dead here. And I was very proud to have came up with rook f8. So if you calculated rook f8 and especially found the reason why this works, very well done. Let's explore this move. So it attacks the queen. And it looks kind of funny to play this because the rook can be captured either way. But I spotted a pretty incredible resource in this line. And now my opponent made a mistake because I think they assumed that they were winning in this position. And maybe they assumed I was just playing something at long last because I didn't have anything better and was still very much in trouble. So Defibaugh, without thinking about it a whole lot, played queen takes f8. This move comes with check. It's very forcing. I played queen takes f8. He played knight takes f8. And now the issue here for black is that this knight on f8, I can capture it either way, bishop takes or king takes. But in either way I capture, I run into fork problems. So bishop takes f8, knight takes c7 check, forking the king and the rook. Or king takes f8. It's a little bit more complicated, but knight takes on c7 hitting the rook, and say I were to move the rook to safety, now knight e6 check. And white is going to pick up the bishop on c5, and white is up a piece. And going back for a few moves, right here, white is up a piece as it stands. If we count up the minor pieces, if I can't capture this knight, it stands to reason that I'm just going to be down material here. But this is the resource I visualized back when I played rook f8 a couple moves ago. It's castles queenside. Those of you who saw my castling illegally yet still winning video may laugh at this. Castling queenside saves the day. Unbelievable move. Very aesthetically pleasing to play such a move. I get my king to safety, I guard c7, and not only am I still attacking the knight on f8, but I'm also hitting the knight on d5. So, extremely satisfying to play this move. And when this happened on the board, I knew I was out of the woods. We'll look at, in a second, I'll just show you a couple more moves of how the game went after that. But just to back up here after rook f8, some other relevant considerations. You might compare queen takes f8 with knight takes f8. This is a little bit trickier of a move order because here, if I play queen takes f8, I'm going to run into knight takes c7 again. And also if I castle, trying to use the same idea, I run into queen f5 check. And this is trouble because after king b8, white has knight e6, and white's going to emerge up material thanks to the attack on the rook. Queen takes d5, knight takes d8. I'm going to be down probably a full rook here, actually, because queen takes d8, queen takes c5. Also, I can't play knight takes d8 because my queen is hanging. And if queen takes f5, there's an in-between move here. Knight takes c6. So that was another thing I had to take into consideration. But I saw that if knight takes f8 was played, I'd have this nice move, knight e5. Another in-between move. So always pay attention to in-between moves when you're calculating. You have to be quite certain about them. They can be great defensive resources if you can time them properly. An in-between move is interrupting kind of the normal sequence of a combination, often with a check or an attack on a major piece. So knight e5. And that knocks white off balance because the queen would love to stay defending both of these knights, but it doesn't quite work out. I think I had a brief line here. If queen e4, I can play king takes f8, and white might develop bishop f4, but rook d8, and I'm in time to put pressure on this knight, and black gets out of the woods. Knight takes c7, queen takes c7, bishop takes e5, queen e7. Position still looks a little bit messy, but there is material equality at the moment. So you can see I'm hanging on by a thread in these variations, but hanging on nonetheless. And rook f8 is really the only way to get the job done. I should also point out there's some tries that look decent but do fail. For instance, I remember in the game spending some time on bishop to b6. But one of the major issues is this queen f5 move. And I don't exactly know if this was in Defibaugh's plans when he played queen f3, but queen f5 is extremely irritating. It's kind of tempting for white to take here right away, but that's a little less clear, I think, if black starts running away in this direction. But queen f5 introduces the threat of knight takes on g7 and also getting the bishop involved, bishop g5, and controlling these d7 and c8 squares. My king is totally in the open. It's bad. Likewise, I think knight e5 here is not working. Again, queen f5 is going to be crushing. I briefly considered king d7, but knight takes c5, queen takes c5, queen f5. Again, this move comes in, and it's just really painful. King d8, bishop g5, white's pieces rush into the game. So really only rook f8 is going to cut it. And I should say relatively best for white after rook f8 is bishop f4 still. I think that would have been the move white should try here, although it's kind of hard to play this and kind of admit that you should have played bishop f4 on the previous move. Here's just a sample line. It's quite complicated, but on bishop f4, I can play king d7, and the game might go bishop takes d6, rook takes f3, bishop takes c5. Still tricky because if king takes e7, there's knight takes c7, and white will pick up the rook in the corner. But black can play b6 here just to add to the confusion of the position, and white having a couple pieces under attack, it seems like has to go for something like knight g5, b takes c5, knight takes f3. But here at the end of the line, black can play king d6, and I believe black will get the piece back because the knight is under attack, and if knight f4, there's rook f8, lining up on both of these knights. So the engine was saying white should play knight c3 here, whereupon black can take, and we have a nice situation with a bunch of pawns on the c-file. especially if white plays b takes c3. Bunch of double isolated pawns for white and triple isolated pawns for black. White should be a bit better here, although funnily enough, there's material equality in this line too. So that's what objectively is the best continuation for white after rook f8, this bishop f4 move. But as I already described, white played queen takes g7. One other note, one strength of rook f8 is that it guards that f5 square. That's one of the main redeeming features of this move. So if white plays knight takes g7, I can go king d7, and there's no queen f5 that can bother my king. So yeah, the game did go queen takes f8, as I already said. Queen takes f8, knight takes f8. This castle's queenside move, one of the moves I'm more proud of in my chess career. Just really cool to play a move like that. And my opponent played knight takes c7 here. Still a little bit tricky. Had to anticipate this as well when playing rook f8. If you want to pause your video one final time and ask yourself what black should do here, feel free to do that. Take another sip of tea while you're doing that. Okay, so these forks are still persisting. If king takes c7, I'm going to run into this fork, right? Multiple problems here, especially the fork on the rook on d8. However, and same if rook takes f8, there's knight e6 with a fork here, and I can't play rook f5 to guard the bishop because that's covered. However, I can play the backwards move, bishop takes f8, so this is what happened in the game. White played knight e6, I played rook e8, Defibaugh took on f8, and here on move 20, I took back rook takes f8. And I believe at this point, black should be better, somewhere between probably a slight and a clear advantage to black. It's, again, material equality after all those adventures. But I'm pretty well coordinated. I have two strong pawns in the center. White still hasn't brought these pieces into the game. Pawn on g4 looks kind of out of place. I did end up winning this game in, 38 more moves. I'm not going to show you how the rest of the game went because it actually was fairly complicated, and I think white did a nice job of getting back into it. But the main thing was I even gave myself a chance from that hopeless position where I was really dead to rights had white played bishop f4 instead of that queen f3 move here on move 15. So despite the opening pickle, I managed to escape because I recognized that this was a critical moment and that only tenacious defense and a lot of calculation was going to cut it. And it's important if you're going to play a move like this that you have the tactical ramifications worked out in advance. So I didn't have to scramble to find a move like castle's queenside after already having committed to sacrificing this rook. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this example of defense in chess. This was not so much a strategic defense. It was definitely more tactical, lots of calculation involved, but it is something you should think about. So adding some defensive study to your general chess study, or at the very least, incorporating elements of defense into your game analysis, asking yourself how you can improve in defensive situations. I might even make this into a series. Anyways, if you have any questions about this game, let me know. And thanks as always for watching, guys. I'll be back again with another video.